Hey, how about that intro? Welcome back to Dana's Game Reviews. Today I'm going to be doing not a full-fledged review per se, but a reviewparison of Super Metroid and Metroid Prime. These are both absolutely brilliant games, but I just sort of wanted to because there's always a debate of, is 2D side-scrolling Metroid or 3D Metroid better? And I just sort of wanted to, do my own little video comparing the two, sort of the most quintessential 2D Metroid and the most quintessential 3D Metroid. Also, the fact of the matter is, Super Metroid and Metroid Prime are probably the most similar thematically, so I thought it made the most sense to compare these two particular games. Now, this might seem very much like a poor man's version of some of the Game vs. Game episodes that you may have seen on the Commonwealth Realm channel, another one of my favorite YouTube channels. Starting off, I'm going to be talking about Super Metroid before I move on to talking about Prime, and then saying which of the two games I think is objectively superior, that even exists, as well as which one I personally prefer playing. Starting off with Super Metroid. First off, I want to get out of the way that 2D Metroid game design and 3D Metroid game design are by no means monolithic, but as I already said, it made the most sense to compare these two games, which are objectively very thematic in terms of story beats and even gameplay beats. So, here's what I have to say about Super Metroid. Super Metroid is so tightly designed, and it features such a satisfying feedback loop of sorts. A feedback loop that consists of exploration, of fighting bosses, gaining new abilities, being able to fight more enemies, being able to explore more, opening so many more doors, both literally and figuratively, which just expands the chances of exploration even more. And like I said, gaining these new items always pays off in spades, sometimes in ways you didn't even realize the first time around. Now, this game has so many, it's very beat by beat in its design. It's almost like the beat of a drum, and it never skips a beat. There are no dull moments. There is rarely any downtime whatsoever with Super Metroid. And this is a game where the bosses, every single boss is amazing. They start great, with fighting Ridley on the little ship, and then they just keep getting better and better and better from there, culminating in a final epic duel with Mother Brain. Due to the nature of this game being in two dimensions, the map is very straightforward to follow. You're basically moving left, right, up, down, so only 4 axes. It's definitely got that sort of just using the X and Y axis instead of, adding in all the other mathematical, fancy schmancy math axes that 3D game design obviously requires. Again, there are no duds with the boss fights, and the musical score for this game is just masterful. Who can forget, ba ba da ba 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 ba, and just good stuff like that, and the Ridley theme, ba 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 da ba 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 da. Honestly, this game is so darn near perfect. There are very few objective shortcomings to this game whatsoever. Yeah, there could be a little bit of a few backtracking issues due to the fact that the game obviously can be a little more cryptic given the time it was made in. But even that's a little bit debatable because a lot of it is just, you figuring out, the hints that the game already gives you along the way. The Morph Ball, I have to say, is used quite a bit in this game, but it's also, the use for it is much more minimal. It's used to sort of get into tight cracks in the walls, go through short tunnels, and occasionally plant bombs and power bombs. Apart from that, doesn't really serve too much use. Of course, the Morph Ball came about due to the fact that the NES, which preceded the Super Nintendo, which is the console Super Metroid is on, couldn't really do crawling animations so well, so they just gave Samus a Morph Ball, which also spawned the infamous meme, which, I'm not going to say here, because I'm so annoyed hearing that meme so many times. But yeah, Super Metroid is objectively it's a flawless game. It's a heavenly experience. It's literally something the Nintendo gods literally blessed onto the world of mortal men. And it is a game that, regardless of whether you're playing it for the first time or the 10 millionth time, it never gets old or boring. Moving on, I want to talk about one of my top 3 favorite games of all time, Metroid Prime. Metroid Prime is, of course, in 3D, and oh boy, it takes full advantage of this fact, and it really enhances the immersion of the game. Due to the first-person perspective, this just allows you to really feel like Samus Aran. Keyword is feel, because this is a game that, despite its minimalistic narrative, it just really makes you feel like you're in the world of Talon 4. And the world of Talon 4 feels... You know, like how I said in my previous video that Metroid games objectively aren't really that big, but just feel big? Well, I partially take that back, because Metroid Prime actually is big. Talon 4, as blasphemous as it might be to say, is a much bigger and also much more varied planet than Zebes ever was. Zebes had some good diversity. It had jungle areas, fire areas, even an underwater, like, sunken city. Metroid Prime adds a freaking snow tundra, and I am a sucker for snow levels, and that alone, you know, places Metroid Prime above Super Metroid for me. Now, along with this, the game Metroid Prime being in first person, because it is a quote-unquote first-person shooter adventure game, it really takes advantage and leans into this, giving you different visors. Along with just the normal visor, you have like the thermal visor and the x-ray visor, which really let you see the world in a different light. You use it for puzzle solving, for seeing certain things you couldn't see with the normal visor. It just really opens up so many possibilities. Along with that, being a 3D first-person adventure game allows for so many more movement and combat possibilities. This allows a full 360 view at all times, everywhere you are in this game. Unless you're in Morph Ball mode, which I'll get to a little bit later. This just allows so many more options for movements. However, objectively, these movements don't look, and sometimes don't even feel as slick as the movements do in Super Metroid, where the movements in Super Metroid just feel so and look so punchy and just perfect. However, the jumping in Metroid Prime mostly works very well. However, due to the nature of it being in first person, and where you have to land some precise jumps, every so often, you will find a platform that you miss just slightly because you can't always see right below your feet due to being in first person. On the other end of the spectrum, though, certain aspects of the control and movement are much better due to it being a 3D first-person adventure game, such as shooting certain grapple points with the grapple beam due to the semi-auto way the target works. Along with that, just being able to target enemies is much easier due to the semi-automatic targeting a la Zelda. This is arguably even improved with the motion controls introduced in the Metroid Prime Trilogy release on the Nintendo Wii. The boss fights in Metroid Prime are a little more hit or miss. The first few bosses can be kind of a slog, and some of them even downright uninspired at times. Many of the first handful of bosses are just waiting for the enemy to show its weak point and occasionally just moving around them like a drunken shozo. Later bosses really pick things up though, starting with Thardus, a giant rock monster you fight in the Fandrana Drifts region, which is the snowy tundra part. This all culminates in a fight with none other than your arch nemesis Ridley, now known as Meta Ridley. And this is the perfect 3D Metroid boss fight. It takes full advantage of the 3D space. It really utilizes all your weapons and movesets. It's dynamic, multi-fades, and is the best Ridley fight ever. It completely demolishes any of Ridley's previous appearances and boss fights. The final boss fight is also very satisfying and fun, despite lacking the sense of finality and iconic status of Mother Brain from Super Metroid. Likewise to Meta Ridley though, it uses all of Samus's abilities and takes great advantage of the space. Good stuff. Now, I do want to address this because it is a point of contention. Samus does move more slow in the Metroid Prime series. However, I think it actually works in favor of this game's design and world design. Honestly, with how Metroid Prime is crafted, with how methodical it is, it's very hard to imagine how it would really work or really make the game objectively much better if Samus could move faster. Yeah, it would have been cool to see certain movesets that didn't appear, but did their omission really ruin the game? Hardly, in my opinion. While the game Metroid Prime is less beat by beat than Super Metroid, it is so much more methodical, infinitely more atmospheric, and just supremely immersive. The music tracks also do an outstanding job of adding a sense of sadness to this atmospheric world. Half the game is just taking in the planet, noticing environmental clues to the planet's past, and discovering the fates of the planet's inhabitants. I do want to say the Morph Ball in Metroid Prime is far more involved than it ever was in Super Metroid. Now the Morph Ball is used for puzzles, for scaling certain walls, sort of like a fancy Rube Goldberg machine, and even some zany Tony Hawk Birdman-like half-pipe action. It's also even used in several more of the boss fights, which was expanded even more in Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. Still, it's used so much more creatively, and dang it, it's just used so much better than it ever was in the 2D Metroid games up to Super Metroid. Now, weapons don't necessarily stack in the same way that they did in Super Metroid, where oftentimes a better beam would just be a better beam period, and voila, you are good to go. In Metroid Prime, none of the beams or weapons ever become obsolete. That's because there are certain enemies, even certain bosses, that are only vulnerable to certain beam types, even if only temporarily, such as the final boss of the game, which literally forces you to move between beam types and visor types on the fly. And yet, at that point in the game, you feel so natural doing it that it just feels like, yeah, this is almost like a final exam of sorts, but a fun final exam. Now, I do want to say, the backtracking is mostly done much better in Metroid Prime than it was ever done in Super Metroid. This is due to the fact that the game does a good job of pointing you where to go, but not holding your hand in a way a certain Malkovich character did in a certain Metroid game, which I don't really like to acknowledge much. Or Fi from Skyward Sword. No offense, I like Skyward Sword, but that doesn't change the fact that Fi really annoyed the heck out of me. But no, yeah, the backtracking Metroid Prime is so much better because you still have the same amount of freedom to sort of make your own path, and you can even turn off the hint system telling you where to go if you so choose, but it's definitely there aiding you if you so choose, especially for newcomers to the Metroid saga. This is a godsend. It certainly was for me. It really gave me a better idea of where exactly to go, and really for me helped streamline the process, didn't detract from, being able to actually explore, take in the world at my own pace whatsoever, and just made exploration and backtracking, quote-unquote, way more fun. The only downside to this is the final act of the game where you have to hunt for these Chozo artifacts. Similar to games like the Wind Waker where you had to hunt down Triforce shards before the final encounter, in this game you likewise have to hunt down a selection of artifacts before you can get to the final section of the game and defeat both the penultimate and the final boss. Now, as somebody who's played this game so many times, it's by now a no-brainer to do, and in fact, you can pick up many of these artifacts, between, I want to say, main story beats of the game, being the 3 or 4 main sections you get through in the game, but for first-time players, it can be a little frustrating and maybe downright even annoying at times. And while the map system in Metroid Prime looks cool, it's definitely a little more confusing to follow than it was in Super Metroid. This is because it adds more than just the X and the Y axis due to it being 3D. That said, it's still a heck of a lot better than, the first Metroid game on the NES, which had no map at all. At the end of the day, which game do I think is the superior game? Well, I absolutely adore both of these games and think they're both absolute masterpieces, just timeless adventures, and both rank up there with some of the very best that the gaming industry has ever given or will ever give us. However, objectively speaking, I do have to say that as much as I like Metroid Prime, I will acknowledge Super Metroid is objectively the superior game. It's more refined, it's more flashy, due to the fact that, Samus just looks so much more slick in her moveset, and everything just comes together so perfectly. It just has this perfect beat-by-beat feedback that I mentioned earlier. And there really are objectively no flaws to this game. All the bosses are great. Everything about the game is just darn near perfect. With that said, subjectively, that's another story. I honestly still enjoy Metroid Prime more than I enjoy Super Metroid. Now, some of it is personal. This Metroid Prime was the first Metroid game I ever played. It's the game that got me into Metroid. And frankly, I just like it more. It's more methodical, it's more detailed in its world design, it's more atmospheric approach that the devs took really is what sucks me in and makes me just enjoy the world of Talon 4 and everything about it so much more than Zebes. Just the variety of the game, including the enemy variety, and including just the sheer satisfaction of moving in that 3D first-person space. I mean, there's nothing more satisfying than shooting a Metroid with the ice beam and then blasting with a missile than there is in Metroid Prime. And it just takes so much advantage, as I said earlier, of really providing an atmospheric, methodical, immersive feel that could only be accomplished in a 3D game. And that's why Metroid Prime is one of my top 3 video games of all time, period. And, well, that's just sort of my final word here. Again, I absolutely love both games, and this will be my final video Metroid related probably until the release of Metroid Dread, which, man, well, it comes out in about 4 or 5 days till that Metroid Dread comes out. Man, I can't wait. But yeah, again, these are both games that if you've never experienced, oh my god, go play them, like, now. Again, thank you so much for watching this video. Like I said earlier, I just love this series to death, and I cannot wait for Metroid Dread. And I just wish you all the best week, and just stay safe, and I don't know, go drink a whole root beer float, and have a pleasant morning. Bye-bye. Well, thank you very much.